So how did you meet him? And like, I don't know if it's like publicly known that you guys are like collaborative on like the business stuff, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like, how'd you meet him and get into business with him in the first place?
I think he heard me on a podcast. I remember when I was first starting out talking about carnivore, I went on like Ben Greenfield's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he heard that one. He reached out to me and he was like, man, I love what you're doing. Let's chat. And it was close to the time of Paleo FX. So this was way before he was doing social media. For the longest time, he did not want to do social media at all. And he showed up at Paleo FX and we had this great dinner with the whole crew of like his original supplement company. And it was just so cool, like such good people who were interested in like asking questions and really good people. I really enjoyed him. And then we became friends. And I think that I do really like these ancestral principles. I think that Brian is a little more intense about it than I am, but
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate thinking this way. I think there's a lot of benefit that can be gained by thinking about, well, how are we programmed to live, eat, move as humans? And can we mirror that more today to make us more happy? I think that's a very useful construct. It can quickly become, a little bit intense for people, but I think it's a useful construct to at least think about. And I definitely use that as a nutritional construct when I'm thinking about the evolutionary consistency of certain things in the diet. And it helps you or helps me sort of ask questions and look for research that might be contrary to what the mainstream is suggesting with red meat, organs, LDL cholesterol, all these type of rabbit holes to go down. So we met, we became friends. We just enjoyed hanging out, man. We enjoyed hanging out, working out. We see the world the same way. We have a lot of the same values. Really good human to work with. And at some point in my journey, I did a podcast with him and we talked about this openly. I was starting to get offers. People were like, you should make an organ supplement company. And I thought, yeah, it's very aligned for me in terms of my values. I would love to do that. And at the time, Brian and I were friends. He had another company, and I'd called him and I was like, "Hey, man, I'm getting these offers to do these other companies. I just want to let you know as a friend, and like, it's going to be a competitor." And he was like, "Well, let me think about this. Maybe we could do something together." And I was like, "That sounds great." There's just I would say that Brian is like one of these people that I would go to war with. I've never been in the military, but like he's one of these people you would trust with like your children. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you die, like he would, I don't have children, but like it's one of these people that you just believe is a good human through and through. And so that's the kind of people that I would be comfortable going into business with. I've never been a businessman. I'm a doctor, I went to medical school. We don't get shit for business training. I didn't know much about it.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about COGS or MOQs or any of this stuff. And so what a good person to go into business with who understands the space. And it was great because basically everything that we created at Heart and Soil was my philosophies, my creative stuff. And Brian was there to support from the business end with like the ideas and like of how to run it, like the structure and like, how do you get on Amazon? That's a pain in the ass, how do
Yeah.
you build a Shopify store?
Yeah.
Like, but that's what's fun is that like, Brian has his thing that's like all of his ideas. And I got to have a company where it's like, what? Like, let's build a company with organ capsules that actually incorporates like a dietary philosophy, like animal based. And if people pay close attention, an animal based diet, which is a term that I've tried to communicate to people as like a summary, is different than the way that he eats, So like
Mm.
I'm not a huge fan of things like almonds, but he's eating almonds. So even between us, there are some differences in the way that we look at our nutritional philosophies. But it was cool to be able to design a business around sort of my ideas and think like, oh yeah, maybe let's construct it like this because of this. And then we did things a little differently. And ultimately, I think that there's like 99% of the world still doesn't eat enough nutrients from organs. So like, where's the competition?
Mm-hmm.
We just want more people to benefit if possible, and then improve their diet and live a higher quality life.
Yeah, so like I think he did a podcast recently with you and then also Thomas DeLauer, and he
Yeah.
mentioned how the Hadza, when he went to visit with them and live their lifestyle and whatnot, is they were using vegetables for medicinal purposes, was like their actual claimed purpose of them. So is that something that like in general, I know you're not like totally against the notion of using supplements or like phytochemicals like where warranted, but you just assert that you could probably gain the majority of the benefits from lifestyle like hormetic stressors and whatnot. But like when you have the Hadza themselves saying there's like medicinal benefits to vegetables, like where do you see that kind of like intersect? Like how do you go from they're problematic and they're good to like, how do you even know how to incorporate it when you're following this like carnivore based diet model?
Yeah, this is a super important point that I've tried to communicate to people, but it's interesting. And it's been an evolution too. So I definitely think that plants, and we mentioned this briefly at the beginning of the podcast, plants contain chemicals that have physiologic actions in humans. This is not debatable. What I want to try and communicate to people is this question. When you are looking at a plant compound, let's consider the benefits and the risks. I think a lot of these plant compounds, because they're often sold as supplements, we really just focus on the benefits. And a lot of the studies or research that looks at potential side effects is ignored. Metformin is a great example. And metformin is in some ways a derivative of a plant compound. It's from a French lilac, and metformin itself doesn't occur in the French lilac, but compounds that are used to synthesize metformin do. And berberine is similar, although slightly, it's a different molecule from a bark. So a lot of these compounds do occur in plants and can have physiologic effects in humans. But I think it's interesting to look at them and say, okay, should you eat this every day as a food? Is this a food or is it a medicine? Because if you're going to take a plant compound to affect a physiologic reaction in your body, then that's great. But understand that that's going to have a side effect like every other pharmaceutical you're going to get at a pharmacy, whether it's metoprolol, rosuvastatin, simvastatin, or omeprazole, right? Because within medicine, we always know these drugs have side effects. There's no perfect drug that goes in and only does one thing. Statins, for instance, they don't just affect, HMG-CoA reductase. They do all sorts of things. I mean, there's all sorts. HMG-CoA reductase is such an important part of the mevalonate pathway that it affects so many things in the human body. But, there's so many molecules like this, which have all these disparate effects in the human body. And we have to understand that. So plant compounds, and this is kind of the beginning, was one of the things I thought about at the beginning of this carnivore diet. Like, I think we've got plant compounds a little bit, we've given them too much free reign. We've given a lot of free hall passes to the plant compounds and said, oh, look, turmeric does this. There's like 1 or 2 studies of people with OA, osteoarthritis pain with turmeric. That's a freaking great molecule. And I'm like, wait. There's a lot of studies with turmeric that suggest that it's not great. I mean, I asked Andrew Huberman to send me the study, but he didn't send it to me. I was talking to him the other night. He was in Costa Rica and he was like, yeah, there's some studies that show that turmeric decreases testosterone. I was like, that's fascinating because it
interacts with AR more so than actually inhibiting steroidogenesis from what I've seen. So it's like a mild anti-androgen.
So that's interesting, right? And so then we're deepening our understanding of molecules like turmeric, which affects potassium channels. And apparently it looks like it can affect P53 and affect thyroidoxin reductase. And so then we have to look at turmeric, for instance, as a model and say, okay, these are the benefits. These are the side effects. We've mostly forgotten about the plant side effects for us. And then these plant compounds get pushed to the forefront because people are like, oh, you get these people with like polypharmacy of supplements and they're taking sulforaphane and turmeric and, broccoli seed extract, and they're taking, astaxanthin and a million freaking molecules. And nobody's saying like, oh, astaxanthin actually inhibits 5-alpha reductase too, from what I understand. And like, maybe you don't want to combine all these things. And do you really know that you need all those things? Do they make you better? And then as I got deeper down the rabbit hole, I was like, humans can actually do a lot without these plant compounds if we can establish a good foundation of health. And then how do we do that for us? So that was kind of what I was calling into question, like, where is the relative value of these? And with every compound, like, let's have an honest assessment of harms, risks, and net benefit. And then if we're claiming there's a net benefit, let's try and substantiate the fact that net benefit is something that's not redundant or that is actually beneficial for a human. A lot of these are very lofty questions, and it's challenging to say sulforaphane, is a net benefit and it's going to give you more glutathione than you could get by doing other things. But that, I think, should be the goal because there's potential downsides of sulforaphane and other molecules like it.
Have you ever had Rhonda Patrick reply to you?
Never once, man.
Damn. I would love to see that. I think it would
be great. Like, I'm super respectful. I've always tried to be respectful of Rhonda. I would love to debate David Sinclair or Rhonda and just have a conversation about it and say like, okay, these are the things you're saying are the benefits. Like, maybe there's studies I'm not aware of. Like, let's talk about it and understand. Like, for instance, with sulforaphane, like the benefits of sulforaphane appear to be on the NRF2 system. It increases glutathione, which prevents DNA damage. But are we sure that DNA damage is something that we're going to have if we don't have sulforaphane in our diet, right? So that's the question, because there's a lot of ways that you can trigger your NRF2 system. And there's other studies on the other side that suggest that, generally antioxidants don't prevent DNA damage for humans, and that the endogenous mechanisms, glutathione, superoxide reductase, yada, 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 are pretty good if you're a healthy human. Now, are you a smoker? Are you exposed to tons of heavy metals? There's all sorts of baseline metabolic health and overall sort of, let's call oxidative reductive balance, inflammatory states for humans. But I'm curious and at least biased to believe that humans can achieve a lot without these plant compounds. And then we might circumvent some of the bad side effects. And then the question, really interesting question, is like, what do these plant compounds do in us long-term, which is a really fascinating rabbit hole to go down. I recently got on this one, again, talking to Andrew Huberman about non-protein amino acids, which are these amino acids that occur in nature that don't occur in the human body or don't get utilized in the translation of proteins in the human body. And the hypothesis, I believe the gentleman's name is Rubenstein. I believe he was at Stanford, but he's dead now. But he was very interested in the hypothesis that these non-protein amino acids, predominantly from plant foods, predominantly from seeds and beans, could accumulate in the human body and cause misfolding of proteins. Well, that's an interesting hypothesis. Like, if that's contributing to neurodegeneration, we'd want to know that, and they occur in things like beets and alfalfa sprouts. And then maybe they're in seeds that we don't even know about. So it kind of goes back to that original sort of the first principles. And the way I frame this now is like, look, plant leaves, plant stems, plant roots, plant seeds, they don't want to get eaten. They're going to have defense chemicals. Let's be cautious and careful and understand if they're harming us, or at least ask the question, because let's go back to the original thing. We don't fully understand autoimmunity in humans. And is it possible that these could be contributing to autoimmunity in some people? Yeah. And then you see it happening, at least anecdotally, with stories from the carnivore diet or diets that are elimination type diets. Doesn't even have to be carnivore. It could be autoimmune, paleo, animal-based, which is organs, meat, fruit, honey, and raw dairy. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? That was kind of rambling.
No, yeah, definitely. Yeah. The one thing I would say, or was wondering if you would concede, is that like some individuals don't necessarily have the time to go sauna, cold plunge, do these things that are environmental hormetic stressors that might achieve the same outcome without the side effect profile necessarily. And they may otherwise like have a time constrained day where they have family, they have a 9 to 5 and this and that. And maybe one of these plant molecules achieves some hormetic stress that is comparable or potentially even, supersedes what you might get from some level of environmental stressor that otherwise is just impossible to fit into your day. Like, contextually, do you think there's some situations where there's a viability, or at least acutely, if one day you're like crunched for time, you don't have 30 minutes to go, sit in the sauna, jump into a cold plunge, like do this and that? Do you see like viability in that?
Absolutely. And I think that the conversation is still relevant around them, because then it's like, okay, if you're using the sulforaphane for that, just make sure that you're getting good sources of iodine and check your thyroid and, kind of know what the downsides were, like you would with any other stressor, right? Like resveratrol, for instance. Interesting data with resveratrol depleting androgen precursors. Like, okay, maybe that's not a good one to take long-term, and you wouldn't want that in your diet. Or understand, and, there's other people who are also huge fans of NAD or NMN and NR. Well, NMN and NR are going to deplete your methyl groups. So that's actually problematic, looping back to the MTHFR thing that we talked about. Yeah. If you really believe that you can have longevity benefits, and the whole NAD thing, I think, is a fascinating conversation. I'll just comment on it briefly. I think that there's something there, but if you really believe that there's substantial evidence that NR, nicotinamide riboside, or nicotinamide mononucleotide are going to give you longevity benefits, then by all means take them, but understand that like you probably want to check your B vitamin status and understand your methylation status and your homocysteine. You might want to take methylfolate. You might want to take betaine, which is trimethylglycine, because they're going to deplete those things. And if you get anxious or have psychiatric effects from taking NR, don't ignore it, because you're probably affecting your neurotransmitters. I'll just say this briefly about the NAD, the NAD thing, that with NAD, I think the most interesting thing is that enzyme NAMPT, and that when people are insulin resistant, NAMPT doesn't work as well, because NAMPT is the main way that humans regenerate NAD in the human body. And so I've done a couple of podcasts about this on my podcast, which is called Fundamental Health. I think, again, we're back to metabolic health and insulin resistance as the primary good things, or the reverse of those being the primary drivers of chronic illness, even NAD depletion as we age, because that enzyme NAMPT won't regenerate the NAD. That's just an aside. Throw it in. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, I think it's definitely prudent, because like we do talk about like biohacking and like supplementation a lot on my channel and whatnot. And I think a lot of people would, like when Sinclair talks about his regimen, some people might blindly assume what he's doing is optimal because he's the leading anti-aging researcher and he's at Harvard and all these credentials that you're like, oh my God, like obviously what he does is the best thing ever. On metformin, he does this, he does that. Automatically equates to I should probably do the same thing without like digging into it further, not seeing genetic predispositions, like the thing you mentioned with like the methylation cycle itself and having to, you know, deplete methyl groups and having to assess your choline intake status. You might have to supplement with betaine, not getting enough creatine in. Like all of these things are like tangent things that you also have to understand when you do this one other thing too, that it's pretty comprehensive trying to learn it all. And it's almost overwhelming to a point that, I don't know, makes you wonder.
That's why I think like that's where the sort of ancestral evolutionary paradigm is so fascinating to me. Like, what if humans can be really pretty freaking good if we take care of our circadian rhythm, get some real sunlight, eat foods that are evolutionarily consistent. We can debate what those are or not. And, you know, and then try and avoid toxins and then do things that you care about and try not to get super stressed and, you know, like have a meaningful life and a community that supports you. Like that's pretty simple. And I love the simplicity of that ancestral message. It's like, hey, like, you don't need to take NR, NMN, just be insulin sensitive. And that to me is why that's such a focus of what I do, because I see that over and over and over in the work, that insulin resistance, AKA metabolic dysfunction, is at the center of so many chronic illnesses, that it's understanding how to correct that is so critical. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but we can go wherever you want from here.